Hey there, horror fans, and welcome to the Eric Fright Show, your go-to haunt for all things spooky. I'm your horror host, Eric, and each episode, we dive deep into the heart of horror, from real-life nightmares to the silver screen's most terrifying moments. So, grab your popcorn, dim those lights, and let's plunge into another chilling fright fest together. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Eric Fright Show. I'm your host, Eric Fright, and we are on episode 5 already, guys. Wow. This episode, I've been wanting to figure out a way to do this episode because I think it's not only something that I am passionate to talk about, but I think it's something that a lot of people like us tend to talk about, and that is the living dead. So this episode is going to be about the 1990 remake of Night of the Living Dead, but we're going to cover some topics before we talk about the movie that surround things that are like zombies or, you know, just strange things that go on with that, or our own fears and ideas around death and the living dead and all of that fun stuff. So without further ado, I think we should just jump right into it. The first thing that I want to do is talk about scary, real stories about dead bodies. So I scoured the internet looking for stories about dead bodies that I thought were scary enough and weird enough to share with all of you. And let me tell you, it actually isn't as easy to find true stories about dead bodies than you would think. I thought there was going to be like a plethora of information out there, and I really had a hard time finding much of anything, but I did come across an article from BuzzFeed.com that I'm going to go over with you all, and that is titled, "Morticians, ER nurses, and other people who work with the dead are sharing their wildest, creepiest experiences on the job." And this was from 2022, so it's not even like it's super old. So one of the things that most people might not know when someone dies is, we're going to read a quote. First one is this one. It says, "Sometimes when people have died and we turn them over to clean and dress them, they still have air in their lungs and will make grunting noises when moved. Scared the crap out of me first time I experienced it." Now, as someone who used to want to be a funeral director, and have always been drawn into the macabre and into death and paranormal and all of the things like that, upon my research of like things like that, I knew that that bodies will have involuntary movements and sounds and things like that within hours after someone passes away. So that I knew about that, but I don't know, even if you have the knowledge, I think it would still, the first time that happens, if I was around that, would still has to be such an eerie feeling, right? I mean, it's just terrifying to think of them, you know, reanimating, I guess. The second one on this list says, one of the descendants' grandsons faked a breakdown over the casket. While doing so, he stole all of her jewelry off her body. It didn't take long for the family to figure it out. A large brawl broke out, and the jewelry was retrieved. The creepy thing was that 2 weeks later, that grandson turned up at the morgue, needing to be processed and buried. That's what... Okay, is it a mob family? I want more information on this story, because what the hell? How old was the grandson? How old was the the deceased? Like, I don't know. I don't feel like we have enough information. I mean, it's a short paragraph, and I guess it's like to the point that they just want to hit the mark from BuzzFeed. But I wanted to find out more about that, because that to me is that's fucking eerie, if anything. Third one on the list says, I am an ER nurse. One time, we had someone die, and no one came to claim the body. So they went to the morgue, and that was it. But their phone stayed behind in the ER by accident, and every day at 2:30 p.m., an alarm would go off. We couldn't turn the alarm off or shut the phone off without a passcode, and the battery on that thing was lasting forever. So we locked it in the med room, but it was still really loud. We had to listen to that dead person's alarm haunt us at the same time every day for a week. To this day, I shudder when I hear the same ringtone. It's gotta be very, very strange situation, and it's always sad to think about people that pass away without any family or friends or anyone that actually comes to claim the body. Now the alarm could be, it sounds like it's a ritual or a medication reminder or something, right? But I did want to touch on this because I read something recently too around the topic of bodies not being claimed and everyone being like, this is just terrible, this is just terrible. And I want to remind people that not everyone who has passed away was a great human being, right? Just because someone has died, we tend to like only talk about good things about them and how it's so unfortunate that they died alone and that nobody's taking care of them and that the state has to bury them. They could have been terrible human beings to people. There's usually a reason that's not most likely than not. This person probably was not a nice person because it's not common to not have anyone in your life that cares about you. It's usually a reflection of oneself. So I just wanted to put that out there. Could be a hot topic. I'm ready to debate you if you want to debate me. And then I wanted to just do one more on here. And the one is this number 4 would be, quote, my best friend growing up lived in the upstairs of his family-owned funeral home. We used to play hide and go seek in the caskets until one day one of the empty caskets wasn't empty at all because they had just gotten a delivery from a different funeral home. Can you fucking imagine? That would be me because I used to like cut school and go to the cemeteries and just all of that. So if I had a friend that was in a funeral home, I would be playing hide and seek in those caskets as well too. But can you imagine the shock on the child's face when you opened it up and there was a body inside? I bet you they never played hide and seek in any casket ever again for the remainder of their childhood because they were probably just the shock of a lifetime. God, like that's just terrible. But those are some stories that BuzzFeed have from different people. Not really, too terrifying, but I thought it was relevant for the topic of Night of the Living Dead. But there's another topic that we need to talk about a little bit more importantly of surrounding Night of the Living Dead, and that is how to survive a zombie apocalypse, right? So I was like, I used to have a book and I can't find it and I don't remember who wrote it. So I was like, okay, I have to figure out some like thing on the internet that isn't just some crazy person's ideals on how to survive a zombie apocalypse. And what I found was an article from sciencefocus.com titled How to Survive a Real Life Walking Dead Apocalypse. I'm going to read it. It's by Stephen Kelly, and this was also published in 2022. And it says survival experts and professional preppers give their top tips on how to survive a zombie invasion. So if you're one of those people that think the zombie apocalypse is coming and you want to learn some tips on how to survive it, then this is the part of the show that you really want to pay attention to. So the first tip says stay at home again. John Ramey, founder of survivalist company The Prepared, oh my God, Jesus Christ, The Prepared, doesn't recommend sinking your money into a bunker. He says instead of thinking about things like bunkers, he says we should be focused on hardening our existing homes and communities and making them more resilient with doors that take more than one kick to bring down. Your home is your castle. It's the best place to ride out any emergency. I'm not going to read every part of this article, but I'm going to read like highlights of it. And for me, I always say I would just obviously stay home too and just try to fortify my place. But you also have to look at, if you've watched The Walking Dead and things like that, it's a catch-22 because it depends on where you live. If you live in the fucking city and everyone's a zombie, like the odds are really against you. There's really nowhere to go. There's tight quarters. There's millions of people, thousands of people in this city. So it really depends on where you live, on what you should decide that you need to do, either get out of there, plan somewhere else, or fortify your home. The other tip is supplies, which goes without saying. Quote, it says, fail to prepare and prepare to be eaten alive, screaming. According to Remy, you should be well stocked with basic supplies. Obviously, I don't know anyone. So zombie apocalypse or any apocalypse, any doomsday prepper will tell you that you need supplies. So that goes without anything. Let's see. There is an interesting one. The next one says skills. It doesn't really matter how many supplies you have. However, if you do not have the skills to use them, this is where I would come in, right? I would understand certain things, but I don't have, like, I was never a Boy Scout or Eagle Scout or anything like that, like my husband was. Like, I don't know how to survive in the wilderness. I can't do a lot of those things. So that would be where I would have my faults. I would need to start learning certain skills in order to survive the end of the world, especially a zombie apocalypse, because that would be one of my downfalls. Another thing is where to go, which we just talked about. Depending on where you live would be decided on where you should end up in the event that the zombie apocalypse occurs. And then it has the last one, which is zombies. And this one says, but what about the zombies themselves? According to zombie expert Cameron Carlson, first of all, there's a zombie expert out there, people. There's probably multiple, but it's not something that you... What do you do for a living? I'm a zombie expert. Like, that is so wild to me. But anyway, according to zombie expert Cameron Carlson, it depends on whether they are the rabid kind that run like wild animals or they're slow, shuffling, Walking Dead variety. If they are fast, I know I'm not outrunning them, he says. So you have to turn to stealth. Move in the shadows, underground, any way to avoid them. If you get into a confrontation with a fast mover, you know where there is one, there is more. Unless you have multiple people in your group who know how to use weapons tactically and proficiently, you're done. As for the slow ones, just move around them. I think it's a really good point. I think I would survive longer, and obviously survive longer with slow-moving ones than the fast-moving ones. But first of all, I don't like being chased, period. And dead bodies freak me out. So fast, flesh-eating corpses chasing me, I will be in such a state of panic that I would probably just run into a wall. I would be stuck somewhere, and they would just tear me the fuck apart. There's no denying it. I would be done for. I would just be done for. So those are some tips to survive the zombie apocalypse, and I hope that they were helpful. But like I was saying, I'm going to move on and talk a little bit more personally about my relationship with this topic. As I said, I used to want to be a funeral director, and that I've always had this weird relationship with death. And I think mostly it's because I was really exposed to it at such a young age, and I spoke about that previously all the time. But it always was terrifying and fascinating to me. And I think I wanted to become a funeral director was because of my compassion for the families of the deceased. I firsthand know what it's like to lose very important loved ones in your life and the devastation that can bring. And I think that I have the capacity and the empathy to provide families with a final goodbye and a comforting shoulder during one of the most difficult decisions that they're going to make for this person in their life, right? So that was what I wanted to do, but this is ironic. I was in like 22 and working at a convenience store when I realized that's what I wanted to do with my life, and that I wanted to go to college. And so I was living with my father and sister at the time, and decided and asked him if I was able to please quit my job to go to school full time. And he said yes. So I quit my job, was signing up for school, and the week before classes, my dad died of a heart attack. And so I had started a semester, but I just wasn't able to get into it. I went into a downward spiral of drinking heavily, going out every night, not going to class. I dropped out, and I just went into a dark place for a while. But that, and I never fully went back in, because in my area, that was the only school that offered the funeral program. And when you accept financial aid and then you drop a class during the class, you are then responsible financially for that course or that semester. And it was a couple $1,000s, and I just never had the money to pay it. And so it just never happened. I never went back to that life. And I sometimes wonder if I made the right. I mean, I know I didn't make the right choice dropping out the way I did, but I mean, everything I believe happens for a reason. We end up where we're supposed to be. So I don't dwell too hard on past decisions, because I know I can't change them. I just think of what I can do in the moment I'm in now, and what I can try to do to get to where I'm being with the knowledge that I have today, right? But I lost myself. But back to the obsession of death. I don't know what it was, but like you used to have action figures. I would portray, like, do like horror movie scenes and stuff. But I also would I would do funerals for them. I would have bury them in the yard. Like, I was a very strange child. My favorite toy was a rubber Halloween skeleton that I found at just like a regular party store. And I named it Jamie, after Jamie Lloyd from the Halloween franchise. And I took that skeleton everywhere. And as a grown man now, I wonder how, like, and I don't have my parents, but I wonder what it was like for them to have this weird little boy who was obsessed with death and the macabre, and walking around with a skeleton as their favorite toy. Like, I am so curious. I wish I was able to ask these questions to know how that is, because like, as an adult, I mean, that's fucking weird. I mean, I just, I guess I could ask my sisters how they felt, but it's still not the same. I wanted to know how my parents felt about it, but I guess we'll never know. But that concludes segment 1 of Fright Files. We're going to move on now to segment 2, Featured Fright. Attention horror fans, I am thrilled to announce my collaboration with the legendary Fangoria. Whether you're a die-hard horror fanatic or you just love a good scare, Fangoria's got you covered with the best in horror news, features, and collectibles. And guess what? As a special treat for my listeners, you can now get 20% off your entire order at Fangoria.com. Just use promo code The Eric Fright Show at checkout. Don't miss out on this killer deal. Stock up on all things horror and join the frightful fun. Stay spooky, my friends. Now, back to the show. So we know already that this week's featured fright is Night of the Living Dead remake from 1990. The plot from IMDb is: when the unburied dead return to life and seek human victims, 7 refugees shelter in a house in the Pennsylvanian countryside. It has a rating on IMDb of 6.8 out of 10 and a 68% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is a pretty good rating, I would say, from those two standpoints. And our characters are, we have Barbara, who is played by Patricia Tallman, and she can be described as a stark contrast of the original 1968 version. In this version, she's more proactive and more resilient, and she does embody a little bit more of the modernized, empowered female character that we started to get in the 80s and 90s, instead of being like the damsel in distress that we saw in the original. She starts off that way, but then we see her do more of a wake up. Our next character we have is Ben, who's played by Tony Todd. We love Tony Todd. He's just terrifying. It was good to see him in a different role for me, I think, than Candyman, because I was terrified of Candyman. So humanizing Tony Todd in another role really helped me know that it was not real. But Ben is very strong and resourceful character. He clearly is a natural leader and takes charge of that situation, and figuring out how to make certain tough decisions. So that also doesn't help him with some of the characters, and that's the same in the remake as well as the original. Then we have Harry, who is played by Tom Towles, and he is pretty much the same. He's abrasive, he's stubborn, and he's confrontational. Um, he's nothing like Ben at all. So they just like they had to have the nemesis in there somehow. Then we have Helen, who is played by McKee Anderson, and she's a little bit more of a complex, tragic character. She's the wife of Harry, but she isn't. She's a devoted wife, but she doesn't want to, you know, have conflict with everyone. Then we have Tom, who is played by William Butler, and he's a young character, and he's more, I guess you can say, hopeful and optimistic than the rest of them. And he has his girlfriend Judy Rose, and they try to remain positive, which goes on to the next character, who is Judy Rose, who's played by Katie Finneran. And she's also young, but kind of naive, and she does have a lot of courage, though. She goes right out there, and to the detriment of her character, I think, at some points. Then we have Johnny, who is played by fucking Bill Moseley, guys. I had no idea that it was Bill Moseley until I was writing this episode, and I just saw him at New Jersey Horror Con, although I didn't personally go up and meet him because I was out of funds. But Johnny, if you know, he's the infamous character that starts the "He's coming to get you, Barbara." So, not in it very long, but still very memorable. And lastly, we have Sarah, who is portrayed by Heather Mazur, and she is the daughter of Harry and Helen Cooper, who has been bitten by one of the undead on their way to the house. So let's talk about now themes involved in the movie of Night of the Living Dead. Obviously, first and foremost, we have the theme of survival and resourcefulness. So the characters are obviously struggling to survive against the zombie apocalypse, and the movie is going to demonstrate ways that the characters are trying to stay alive under these circumstances. We see them doing things like nailing boards to the windows to keep them out, trying to use radios, like things that they can find around the house that they're in to try to survive, because this is brand new to them. They don't understand what's happening, and now they have to figure it out. Another theme that we see is fear and paranoia, and rightfully so, right? I mean, they're in the danger of zombies. Like, it's not even like a normal situation. So obviously, the fear and paranoia of being trapped inside of a house with strangers and zombies trying to get in, you start to get paranoid on other people's motives, other people's intentions, and that starts to really get shown with conflict that between these survivors, which goes on to the next part of our theme, which is human nature and conflict. The tension that is caused from fear and paranoia is causing the conflict between the cooperation and self-preservation, and some characters who are prioritizing group survival while others are only focused on their own safety, which is extremely important to note. People, if you're in a situation, pay attention to the people that are prioritizing the entire group from those who are only thinking about themselves. The ones that are only thinking about their own safety are dangerous. Keep that in mind. Another theme is leadership and authority. We talked about this with Ben. He assumes that leadership role. He's giving commands. He's taking charge, and rightfully so, because somebody in any emergency or in any situation that is causing for quick decisions, somebody has to be level-headed. Somebody has to make a call, and other people have to trust them. Because if everyone is trying to make the same, like everyone trying to be in charge, no one's in charge. Everyone's making their own decisions, and again, extremely dangerous situation. Then we have the theme of transformation and empowerment, and that is seen with Barbara. Barbara, we meet. She is, she's not even able to speak after witnessing her brother being killed by the zombies, and zombies in general trying to get her in her car. These are, these situations, and she ends up at the farmhouse unable to speak and then we see her grow and snap out of it because of Ben into a very strong character who is a badass and one of my favorite final girls. Then we have the theme of isolation and entrapment. So we were just talking about this. The setting of the farmhouse is physical, but also a symbolic representation of isolation and entrapment. They're trapped by the zombies outside, but then they're also the isolation caused their fears and conflicts. These are just things that are going to happen when you're in those situations. Then we have the theme of loss and tragedy. Now, I'm going to give a spoiler. Aside from the loss and tragedy from Barbara's end, we have the loss and tragedy of the child. And that's very symbolic, right? We have parents who are just trying to do what they're trying to do for their daughter who is slowly dying in the basement. They don't I think that they're it's not that they're naive. They know that she's not going to survive. I think it's pretty well known that this little girl is slowly going down, and they don't want to accept it. They want to keep hope, because who wouldn't? But it ultimately succumbs. She succumbs, and we see that infamous scene of her killing her mom. Then we have a theme of societal breakdown. So the complete collapse of civilized behavior is very, very relevant in not just Night of the Living Dead, but just any apocalyptic movie. It is just very scary how quickly societal's norms are thrown out the window when it no longer exists. There are people that try to hold on to the way of life and try to think that, keep the rules and laws and things like that in place. But more often than not, people not like the idea, but people take on the role of judge, jury, and executioner for themselves. And they just decide that they're going to be the ones that do things. And it's terrifying. And then the final theme I want to talk about is racial and social commentary. And now it is not as explicit than it was in the original 1968 version. The remake still touches on racial and social issues, particularly through Ben. His interactions with the other characters and the dynamics of authority and trust subtly reflect ongoing social tensions. And I think that is so important that we have these in movies, because it's a real thing. And I love that even back in the 90s and even in the 60s, creators and directors were touching on those topics, because they are important topics that need to be discussed. But those are our themes for Night of the Living Dead from 1990. And now I'm going to just share my personal thoughts with this movie. This is one of my favorite movies, and I used to watch it all the time, but I had never seen the original. But I remember my mom told me about the original because my mother's family, like her mom and them, were from Pittsburgh, where the original cemetery was at. So my mom would visit family sometimes, and she told us this story, me and my sisters, a story about how her one cousin took her to the cemetery from the original and fucking scared the life out of her. And I just think that's hilarious to me. I would love to visit the original cemetery too. It's got to be super cool. But I think what stood out to me when I was a kid about this movie was how it was a different type of horror movie than what I was used to seeing. It wasn't a slasher. It wasn't a maniac in a mask after people. Instead, it was the dead coming back to life. And what's even scarier is that we don't know why, right? We meet this sibling. We meet Barbara and Johnny going to visit their mother's grave. And during that visit, they are, attacked by the undead. And that's it. Like, throughout the entire movie, it's just about survival, and we have no idea why they want to kill and eat the living. They just are coming after them, and that's just was fascinating and terrifying to me. I remember when I was a kid watching this movie, and when we first see the first zombie walking through the cemetery, we don't know that it is a zombie yet because he just looks normal until he begins to get closer, and then his clothes are like sliding down his chest, right? His just clothes and his feet are walking on his pant legs, and it's just like a weird thing. And then his face starts to twist in like a weird, evil grin, kind of. And then you see the autopsy stitches and the scar, and then it hits you that this man is not alive, but he's actually a fresh corpse who then it shows him from behind, and his entire back of his clothes were cut off. So this man was probably getting ready to be buried, and in his casket when he came back to life and got out of the casket. But when I first thought he was just a regular guy, and that's what fucked me up, is that he looked normal, and that's what would get me. One of them getting too close or something, I don't know, but terrified the fuck out of me. But I want to talk about that scene in a little bit more depth because it leads me to what my favorite kill from the movie was, and that was Johnny's death scene in that movie. Okay, it's not supposed to be funny, but I remember when I watched it hysterically cracking up because it caught me off guard. So for those of you who don't know, spoiler alert, when Johnny starts wrestling with the one zombie, they trips over his feet and his head gets crushed on a tombstone. But the way that the effects made it happen in 1990, it just was hilarious. But it's still my favorite kill because he was just tussling with a zombie and tripped over himself and smacked his head off a tombstone. Like, the zombie didn't even actually kill him. He killed himself somehow. But that concludes this segment because I want to jump into segment 3, Frightful Facts. So there are going to be 10 facts about the 1990 movie of Night of the Living Dead. With fact 1, again, these are all found across the internet. Fact 1, that this movie was directed by Tom Savini, who, at the time, Tom Savini is a renowned special effects artist. So this actually was his directorial debut, and that is from IMDb. The second fact is that this was written by George A. Romero and John A. Russo. So it was co-written by him, who George A. Romero wrote the original 1968 film, which most people already knew. They wrote this as well, and this is from Rotten Tomatoes. Sorry, I lost my thought. The third is that there's also a cameo by George A. Romero in it. He appears as a newscaster in a scene that emphasizes the film's connection to its predecessor. That's also from IMDb. Fact number 4 is that the filming locations and set design in the film was a real house in Pennsylvania, chosen for its similarity to the original 1968 setting. The set design was carefully crafted to maintain continuity with the original while updating the aesthetic for a new era. That's from Horror News Network. Fact 5 is surrounding the budget in the box office. So the film had a budget of approximately $4.2 million and grossed about $5.9 million at the box office, and that's from Box Office Mojo. That's a pretty good. I think it's still a financial success in my opinion. And then fact number 6 is the use of practical effects. So the film is noted for its use of practical effects and makeup, which were crafted by Tom Savini. So they were highly praised for their realism and impact, and that source is from Dread Central. Fact 7 surrounds the filming location. So we just spoke about this, but the film was shot in Pennsylvania, primarily in the Pittsburgh area, where the original 1968 film was also shot. So they stayed in the same kind of area as the original to keep close to the vibe, right? And that is from Horror News Network. Fact number 8 is the music by Paul McCullough. I can't say his name. Oh my God, I'm terrible with names. But anyway, the film's score was composed by Paul, let's try again, McCullough, contributing to the film's eerie and atmospheric tone. That's from soundtrack.net. Fact 9 is that the film was rated R by the MPAA due to its graphic violence and intense scenes reflecting its horror genre, and that's from the MPAA. And the last fact is the critical reception. The remake received generally positive reviews for its faithfulness to the original while updating certain elements for a modern audience. It holds a fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and that is from Rotten Tomatoes. And I think that is important to note and leave as our last fact, because many remakes flop and are not received positive and do not have a good rating. So Night of the Living Dead, I think it has something to do with that it was the same creator updating it. But anyway, those facts are highlighting just some key aspects of the film and its reception. Now, it has come to that time in our show where we are moving on to the final segment, Fright Picks. So, I can't leave you guys without 5 more Fright Picks from me to give to you. And obviously, I wanted to stay on theme for The Living Dead. So, first fright pick I have for you is Night of the Living Dead from 1968, whose synopsis is: a ragtag group of Pennsylvanians barricade themselves in an old farmhouse to remain safe from a horde of flesh-eating ghouls that are ravaging the northeast of the United States. The original Night of the Living Dead is streaming on Peacock. The second movie I want you guys to go check out is Return of the Living Dead from 1985, whose plot is when 2 bumbling employees at a medical supply warehouse accidentally release a deadly gas into the air. The vapors cause the dead to rise again as zombies. You can find that on YouTube, and it is fucking cult classic, and it's like a spoof to Night of the Living Dead. The third movie is the remake to Dawn of the Dead from 2004. The plot of that is a nurse, a policeman, a young married couple, a salesman, and other survivors of a worldwide plague that is producing aggressive, flesh-eating zombies take refuge in a mega Midwestern shopping mall. That is streaming on Prime, and just another Romero classic. Number 4 is one that I actually haven't seen, but I know that it's a classic, and I want you guys to watch it, and I will watch it eventually, which is 28 Days Later from 2002. That plot is 4 weeks after a mysterious, incurable virus spreads throughout the UK, a handful of survivors try to find sanctuary. You can check that out on Prime. And then my last fright pick for all of you is Resident Evil from 2002. The plot is a special military unit fights a powerful, out-of-control supercomputer and hundreds of scientists who have mutated into flesh-eating creatures after a laboratory accident, and that is on Netflix. And I'm obsessed with the games of Resident Evil, and I think that the Anderson films are fun, and they did a really good job. But that's it for this episode. Everyone have a really great time until the next time we meet. Bye. That's a wrap on this episode of the Eric Fright Show. Thanks for tuning in and letting me share my love of horror with you. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to rate and review it on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps me reach more horror fans like you. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode, and until next time, stay spooky and keep it frightening.